Welcome, everyone, to the latest edition of StateScoop's and EdScoop's Technology Webinar Series, brought to you today by Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Intel. I'm your host, Wyatt Cash, Vice President, Content Strategy, and today we're going to be exploring the data explosion strategies for state, local, and education IT management. And joining us today, we have several veteran government, education, and industry IT leaders who've tackled some of these issues and have kindly agreed to share some of the key lessons they've learned. So first, I'm pleased to welcome Mark Myers. Mark is joining us today from Arkansas. He's the Chief Technology Officer there. And welcome, Mark. Glad to have you join us.
Thank you.
Also joining us today will be Dr. Paul Kim. He's the Chief Technology Officer and Assistant Dean at Stanford University, and he'll be joining us just in a minute. Also joining us today will be Leo Leung. He's Vice President in Corporate Marketing for Corporate Marketing at Scality, and also Bob Shar, Segment Solutions Leader for the SLED markets for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. So I'd like to welcome all of you to the program. Welcome, gentlemen. So
thank you.
Today, I'd like to also, of course, welcome our audience, including those joining us live today, as well as those tuning in into the archived on-demand edition of this program. And one more time, I'd like to thank Hewlett-Packard Enterprises and Intel for sponsoring today's program. Before we begin, I'd like to just help our audience get familiar with our console and how they can participate, and we do want you to participate. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any questions for our presenters, and we hope you will, during the webcast, you can just click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and type in your question, and then we'll try to answer as many of those during the live webcast as we can, either after each presentation or at the end of the program. I also want to call your attention to the fact that you can get a copy of all of today's slide deck using the resource list widget at the bottom of your console. And in addition to the slides, we also have a white paper available, which I encourage you to download, that has solutions from Scality and Hewlett-Packard Enterprises. Just a couple of other things. You can expand your slide area by clicking on the maximum icon on the top of the slide there, or by dragging the bottom corner. If you do have any technical difficulties, please click on the help widget and we'll have somebody follow up with you. Finally, we will make this program available on demand, and it'll be available in about 24 hours after today, and will be you can get it for as long as 90 days after today's date. So it can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you by email. So if you have colleagues that couldn't join today or you think would benefit from this presentation, please use that link, send it along, and invite them to join in the program. So with that, I'd like to kind of get started with today's program. First, I'd like to initially ask, we got Mark Myers joining us first. And Mark, I know that you've experienced or gone through a lot of learning curve with what you've experienced with this data explosion, and would appreciate if you tell us a little bit more about what you've learned and a little from your experience. Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Wyatt. I appreciate it. And again, thank you likewise to HP Enterprises and Intel for sponsoring us today. And I'm the director of the Department of Information Systems, the centralized IT organization for the state of Arkansas, and also the state chief technology officer. But we're going to talk about the strategies for IT management at state level. And I want to begin with, when I took over, the conversation really was about all the structured data that we had in place. And there were side conversations about what the internal structure was from a legacy standpoint. If you're a state or any government, really, you have lots of structured legacy data because that's how the legacy systems were built. And as you move into a bimodal area, we have to begin to take in external data and unstructured data from other places inside the system. And when that becomes a challenge when you're used to warehousing traditional legacy data. So we began to respond to these increasing data volumes, for instance. Just on a security standpoint, to give you an idea, on a monthly basis, we correlate and analyze nearly a petabyte of data. I want you to think about that for a second, a petabyte of data. Now, we don't keep all that data long term. Once we realize that it's not anomalous data, then we discard it. Otherwise, because the storage requirements would escalate to a level which we couldn't manage. So, yes, we have the technical definition of a volume of data, but we don't store and analyze the large volume of data over time, which would be about 3 petabytes. However, states are very much in the creation, as that indicates, from the velocity. When you talk about the 4 V's of big data, right? We talk about volume, velocity, variety, and veracity. States really do play in the other 3. You always have to wonder about the veracity of your data. How accurate is it? Can you scale to put in more data to make it more accurate? So you worry about the veracity. The volume. We generate tons and tons of data and discard much of it. And then, of course, the variety, whether it's kids with school lunch programs or healthcare data, we have to correlate all that. So the question then becomes, how do you scale from a data management standpoint? How do you scale your analytical capabilities without scaling your operating costs? That's probably the biggest challenge, right? So what tools do you put in place to allow you to teach, train, and educate your workforce to increase their capabilities without increasing their costs? And so I would say that that's our single biggest challenge from a data standpoint, is dealing with those things. But likewise, if you're going to do that, you got to have a strategy built around that. How are you going to increase those capabilities? And one of the things that we're working through in the state right now, other states have already gone down this path, other entities, but the democratization of data use. So we're in the process of creating an open data standpoint, so perhaps you can learn, your citizens can teach you things. We work for the citizens. They're our customers, but they're also our bosses. And so if we make more and more data available, there's going to be analytics that are done by citizens that are going to help government improve. At least that's our hope. As we grow that analytical capability, the data value to the state being able to make decisions increases. And today, we have lots of silos of data warehousing. And so what we're trying to do is create a data warehouse of all this data across the entire breadth of state data and use that from a logical data warehousing. So it may not be physically residing inside of one data center. It may be in multiple places, but logically it looks the same from analytical capabilities. And then finally, we really have to get around the agility piece. How do we manage it faster? How do we manage it in a more agile way that leads us to those decisions so that we as a government can make decisions faster? Once you have that strategy, you can begin to talk about how you're going to use it. I already talking about to our citizens, but even our employees. Today, state employees as a group, don't make a whole lot of use of data, multi-agency data, to make decisions. They're used to using just their legacy data. But things like unemployment insurance have impacts on what your food stamp, SNAP programs have. Same thing is true. Your income tax returns have a verification requirement in your Medicaid populations. You got to make these analytical tools available to your employees so they can take all of the breadth of data and use it to do analytics in such a way as to better serve our citizens. And likewise, from a citizen standpoint, and we're trying to do this now on our Medicaid populations, actually, is trying to teach them to use self-service data. We already do that internally with our state employees. State employees have a tremendous amount of capabilities from a self-service portal that they have access to of managing their own data and seeing how they compare to others that have similar jobs. We need to increase that. That's something that's on my plate to do sooner rather than later, is to increase the ability of employees to manage the data themselves instead of it all being centralized. And I've already talked about increasing the operational analytics. That's just going to really, truly, you see some dashboards of how we're trying to use it out there today. But we're really trying to get after those operational analytics at that individual employee level. Additionally, once we have that capability in place, we're really, truly going to have the ability to make use of the data as valuable. Because it's going to let us decide, well, does that recidivism program work? Is that program working in Medicaid for that population of unmarried mothers and their prenatal visits? Are we maximizing the way we contact them? Creating those models that will then allow us to automate some of those processes in suggesting to that unmarried pregnant expecting mother that, hey, this is your reminder that you need to go to your prenatal visit, so that we can predict which populations inside of that that we need to touch more often and what their exact frequency is we need to touch. We are using quite a bit of open source tools, and so as that talked about earlier, to avoid scaling costs, things like R, to keep those costs down. But teaching that can be a challenge. So, but over time, we're deploying those to our analytics staff and eventually to line staff to let them use things like R and Python to make it much more user-friendly, but also not keep ongoing scalable costs. The breadth of data, I hinted at this earlier, but I just want to reiterate. Every day we have new data sources of external and unstructured data. The example I like to use is when you're doing transportation planning. You can go out and get the data from mobile carriers, anonymized data, to see what your transportation planning should be as opposed to what you think it is. That's the easy example that we talk about external data. And some of the additional data you can get will allow it to be unstructured as well. So traffic counts. You don't get that the exact same way that today your tools are capable of doing the planning. So you have to have a back end that's in a situation that you can analyze that data and push it forward to make those decisions. I already talked a little bit about logical data warehouse. As we begin to move in that direction, it has allowed us to use an increasing variety of data from sources and with minimal impact. And I do mean true minimal impact to existing legacy applications. So we're not disrupting workflows. We're not disrupting applications. We're not disrupting employees' time. We've increased the bandwidth so we don't have latency issues. And so we have an ongoing, and that means on the development side, that ongoing development effort. You have to have the ability to manage the development on the front end so that you don't have those disruptions on the back side. And we're trying to do that. And that's how we're doing. We talk about the data sources, then we figure out what integration tools we're going to do. And eventually at the very top of the stack is our analytic tools and our dashboard tools. I talked about the bimodal approach, right? That we had legacy and we have all the new stuff we're doing. We have to continue down that path, and hopefully over time we'll transition from worrying about the maintenance of legacy data, likely not in my lifetime, to where it's strictly how fast can we digitally replicate that data in some other format. We're trying to create a data lake. We haven't completely done that yet, but it seems to show promise. And so as we continue down that path that we're on, we're going to get there. Now, my agency, we're trying to do it internally. We've created our own internal data lake to try and make us better at doing this before we expand it out for other uses across state government. And if you're familiar with agile project development, that's allowing us to try something and fail fast, if you will, to learn how to rebuild it faster. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do this quickly. I guess quickly is relevant in a government standpoint. But that's the direction we're moving, is to try to continue to develop this project over time in an agile manner while not being disruptive to current ongoing operations. Because quite frankly, if we're disruptive to current ongoing operations, then some child doesn't get fed, some prisoner that's completed their time doesn't get paroled. Those are all things that we have to worry about as a state government. And so with that, I know we're going to put questions off to the very end. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Dr. Kim and let him roll.
Well, Mark, first, thanks very much for giving us that overview. And, I think, interesting. Would like to ask Dr. Kim, you come at it from a slightly different angle as an education technology entrepreneur, as I think you describe it. And tell us a little bit about your experience and what you've learned about managing the data explosion.
Sure. Can everyone hear me fine? Let me grab my slides here. So every organization is different and unique in many ways. But I think that universities are somewhat complex because of its nature. So although many issues and challenges may be similar, but I'll try to pick somewhat distinctive and uncommon issues out of university context. Universities such as Stanford, we're a research-driven university, and we do receive various types of research funds, mostly coming directly to individual faculty or departments, and therefore centralization is quite challenging in many ways. So many elite universities are highly decentralized in many ways, and there are many types of computing facilities and research resources available for universities. And so just to give you an example, medical school, imaging, or physics experimentations, and earth science with various earth related research. I mean, these research efforts create tremendous amount of data with multimedia data. So the growth in the research data, probably these are the areas where they see continuous explosion of data growth. And at the same time, that's trickling down to other departments as well. More and more departments are generating various types of data and try to automate and digitize a lot of things. So universities like Stanford, we have to have support structure that is working for various types of unique and idiosyncratic needs and departments. The financial concerns are rarely on the top of the discussion list. Before we talk about any financial commitment, we have to first talk about, is this innovative enough? Is this the latest approach? Is this related to novel research that we're doing? So the discussion order is quite different at university settings. So again, the standardization of any kind in IT is often painful and exhausting. So what's happening in the landscape of higher education? As I said, we're generating and analyzing enormous amount of data. Actually, we not only want to just generate for the sake of a generation of data, but we like to use the data to predict and design better teaching and learning model for the university. But there are some interesting waves in the higher education space. I'm sure many of you might have heard the term MOOC, Massive Open Online Courses. So there are many online education-related resources that are being generated, inviting students not only from your own institute, but from virtually from around the world. We have courses that have hundreds of thousands of students enrolled, and they're generating all kinds of interesting interactional data sets. So we capture that. And more courses are now being digitized, and they're archived for streaming. So if you're a student, if you missed your class for any reason, then you could still access the lecture videos when you are off to home or elsewhere. And we're digitizing a lot of processes that have been manual labor driven. So from admissions to alumni relations, we're getting rid of a lot of paperwork and paper trails, and incorporating digitized signatures and so forth. So that creates a lot of data. And student learning outcomes are not only just on papers. We used to give a lot of exams and so forth in certain courses, but the students are now required to create all kinds of digital artifacts. They come up with various presentables, e-portfolios, which would have videos and audios and various multimedia components in their assignments. So we're generating a lot of content in that area as well. And with all these activities, what's interesting is that we have ways to analyze some of the data that we collect. So that is related to the big data analytics. And there have been interesting approaches where we can see what types of course paths or learning experiences are better for what type of students with what type of backgrounds. And when we know more about student learning experiences, we can predict the future for other students as well. So we're still at an infancy level. I couldn't say that we have figured out the holy grail, but we are beginning to analyze various types of data sets and signals and indicators to come up with a better designs for individual students and for also the programs as well. So overall, more digital footprints are being captured and analyzed. We have our unique set of challenges because of the context that I just described about universities. We certainly have tremendous waves in the cloud computing, shared storages, virtual clouds, and obviously information security are the most frequently discussed topics in virtually all IT meetings. But there's a huge gap between the technological advancements and best practices that the people are actually doing. The technology is much faster in terms of developing and deploying, but people are taking a very long time to understand the true value of certain innovation from the technology community, and therefore they're very slow to adopt some of those innovations. And so there's a huge gap, and that probably hinders the further the advancement in best practices. And there are blurry boundaries over the ownership of solutions that people have, especially in the university setting. Because universities are, in their nature, they collaborate with various types of entities. Sometimes there's individuals are working together as groups, or multiple departments are working together, or multiple universities. There are external partners and so forth. So when you have various entities involved, some solutions may be free, and some solutions may be paid, and some of them are automatically provisioned, and some of them are required. So if you have, for example, if you have a free Google Drives, maybe Microsoft OneDrives, and some people are using individual Dropboxes and boxes, and etc. So when you start to have so many different solutions with the different conditions, that makes it much more complex. And obviously, because of the nature of the university, it is very hard to standardize. And we have the habit of storing a lot because we are afraid to lose anything. So we tend to not delete anything, and then we store so much. Yet we don't necessarily have the long-term planning or strategy on how to organize our rapidly growing data, and how do we best leverage from the data analytics from our data sets that we grow. And lastly, but there are more, but just for the sake of the presentation, in terms of the security and the risks that we're facing today. So just to give you an example, if I have a certain access to certain storages, if I move from one department to another, or if I'm moving from one entity to another entity, is the identity and then access privileges are all smoothly transferred? Probably not. And at the same time, where do we store data, and especially if we're dealing with high-risk data, are they really kept well in terms of the policies and the protocols? I mean, we try our best, but there are always gotchas and things that fall through the cracks, and we have to reactively remedy certain situations. But I think that we certainly need to raise our awareness of the potential consequences of certain the security risks. And then I think in general, people are slowly adopting the best practices in that regard. What seems to work from my own experience is that if you have a new solution or a strategy that you want to implement, especially in the university settings, it's always good to start with something that people are already familiar with and build from that, and so that will minimize the shock and then the training cost, etc. And it's always good to leverage peer best practice pressure. You know, if it's already working at different universities, especially with the similar university settings, then probably you will run into similar problems. So it's always good to use best practices from the peers and then use that as a leverage to implement new solutions. And since universities are quite with a quite diverse group of people, it is always good to do pilots with multiple scenarios. That will only minimize surprises. You still need to worry about the total cost of ownership and the true real impact of your new solution or policy and strategy. So you always will need to be inclusive in your pilots. And also, obviously, we shouldn't take any solutions for granted. If there are certain solutions provided by the companies, we should look at it in multiple ways to still enhance and tune up, to seek other opportunities to make things more efficient and effective. University settings, there are sometimes, because of the lack of time or urgency of a certain initiative, we tend to ignore any other ways to tune up or enhance certain solutions. But when you certainly do that, then there are obviously opportunities that we can realize. And then I think that the active monitoring is always good. And lastly, Plan A has, in my own experience, Plan A never got adopted, and it was always Plan B or Plan C that was adopted as a resolution because of the difficulty with the standardization, because of diverse groups of people you're working with, because of different identity and access controls and so forth that people bring to the community. It's always good to have a Plan A, B, C, so that you will have certain working solutions that will be adopted by most of the people. And that has been one of the best practices that worked in the university settings. I believe my time is up, so I will end there, and then I will later take questions.
Super. Well, Paul, thank you very much. I really appreciate your kind of really sharing your practical experience, some of the things that you've learned, and I think we all feel the sense of reality of what you're dealing with in the education area. And I think between you and Mark, we've kind of got a good setting for the kind of landscape that enterprises, government, and higher ed are dealing with. I'd love to hear now from both Leo and Bob about some of the best practice ideas that they've gotten to see because they have the perspective of working with numbers of clients. So Leo, tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing out there and what things you might share.
Great. Thanks a lot, Wyatt. And thank you very much, Mark and Paul. I think you, as Wyatt said, set a really good context for some of the solutions that are possible, as well as some of the experiences that I'm sure others on the phone are also encountering. I'm going to be presenting a solution as well as experiences from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Scality, which is the company I represent. Bob Shar is going to join me to cover the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Materials and that part of the solution. So we're here to talk about really some of the points that Mark and Paul brought up, and there's some great themes there. There's a movement to different types of data, moving away from very, very structured data to semi-structured and unstructured. Some examples are on this slide. Whether you're talking about video in terms of research or online courses, there's a huge growth in that. There's a growth in data, whether you're talking about, again, analysis data, images, in imaging, lots of research really at the end of the day is high-resolution imaging. Whether you're talking about security or surveillance, tons and tons of data growth and digitization across the board. You're also talking about new applications. So both from an analysis perspective, as Mark talked about, there has to be an agility to handle the type of data and actually try to get value out of the data. I think both Mark and Paul talked about that. And then the ability to share that data and collaborate on that data, sort of a huge amount of growth there as well. So not just things like resolution and amount of data, but how the data is actually used are all challenges that we see in the market. And when we've tried to address these types of solutions, we've done this for a number of clients as well. It's along all these fronts, right? Whether you're talking about video production and distribution, both from a professional perspective as well as education, whether you're talking about data collection and then analysis and then archiving, customers there. You can see some of the stats there in terms of growth. We're talking about petabytes of data, tens of petabytes. We have customers that are in the hundreds of petabytes of data. And then finally, both from an application perspective and a consumption perspective, you're talking about mobile as well. That's one topic that Mark and Paul didn't bring up. Certainly, when you look at users and you look at how they're consuming and creating data, mobile is a very, very big factor. So fundamentally, we're talking about a sea change, an exponential shift. If this were something that were a 10% change or a 20% change, some of the existing solutions could probably address those challenges, but we're actually dealing with something that's a 5x, 10x change, certainly over time, right? So I think that was expressed earlier in the presentation. And if you look at some of the technologies that are out there today, the design points were really 10, 15 years ago, right, where many of the things that we just discussed didn't even exist, right? The ability, to, for example, to collect a petabyte of security data was not a factor in the design of some of the storage technologies that you're familiar with. So you run into a number of different challenges. You run into challenges in terms of scaling both performance and capacity. These are not, again, most of the NAS types of products, even scale-out NAS types of products, were never built to handle the kind of scale that we just discussed. They make it pretty hard, actually, to scale out capacity into the petabytes. So, again, if you're looking at a horizon of multiple petabytes or tens of petabytes, these solutions are not designed for that. I think people also forget that a lot of the storage technologies, again, a decade ago, didn't require 24/7, uptime. They weren't designed for global use. They weren't designed for people being able to access data at any time on their mobile devices. These were designed for single offices with desktop systems, right? So you actually have a very limited tolerance for failure when it comes to conventional storage. And then even worse, the recovery times are challenged as well. And then last but not least, you had a very, very appliance-oriented world in storage. It's still true today and starting to change, where all the capabilities are tied with buying a box. Okay, and there's many challenges with tying all your capabilities with a specific appliance. You have to go to the same vendor every time. There's scalability challenges. There's a slower innovation cycle. So that's kind of the context around some of the storage solutions that are available today, some of the ways to actually handle the data. So what's the solution we're talking about? So too much text on this slide, apologies, but if you look at it, it's pretty simple. You have lots and lots of different applications, some of which we've discussed, and they need a place to both put data and retrieve data, right? And if you're looking at traditional solutions, you would just buy a box and think that would solve your problem. But as I said, there's lots and lots of challenges with traditional architectures. What we're talking about is a new type of architecture which separates the software from the hardware. Some folks call it software-defined storage. There's other ways to talk about it, but that's really what it is. It decouples the capabilities of storage protection, storage access, that's all in the software layer, and scalability, from the hardware layer. And the combination of Scality and HPE has really put together a solution that addresses a lot of the concerns that I brought up earlier. So again, from a solution perspective, you have Scality. We call our product the Ring, addressing this accessibility, data protection, data access, data management in our layer, combining neatly with HPE Apollo servers. We'll get into more detail about those products, but providing a brand new level of density, power efficiency, and all those types of things in a solution. The combination of the two addresses petabyte scale data for many legacy applications as well as some of the more modern applications. So why did we do this? Very much to address some of the challenges that Mark and Paul brought up, as well as some of the ones we highlighted. You're able to get to the kind of scale you need over time. And with all the different types of analysis that has to happen, all the different types of data collection that's possible today and even more emerging, you're going to get to the petabyte scale at the state government level. You're definitely at the petabyte scale already with many research universities. And having a system to handle that and more is key, both from a capacity and performance perspective, as well as being reliable. So we're very proud of the fact that our solution is able to provide 100% uptime. A lot of that has to do with being able to separate the software from the hardware, being able to, for example, add new hardware to the environment and just keep scaling the environment into the many petabytes, being able to do maintenance and not take the system down. Okay, that's was unheard of outside of service providers until these types of solutions were available. And then finally, being able to take the right hardware you need today and then scale over time. So again, if you were buying an appliance type of product, you're pretty much locked into what's available today. If you want to get some of the new capabilities, you're probably going to be forced to do a data migration into those new appliances. With this solution, the software is protecting the data. So you can pick the best HPE hardware that you need today. Many of our customers, joint customers, are doing just that. But over time, you can continue to add whatever the best hardware is at that point in time into the same system with no migration. So I'm going to go into how this is actually used in the real world with some high-level examples and specific customer examples. So lots of different ways to use this, but as Mark and Paul detailed, there's lots of ways to both collect data and use data. So whether you're thinking about simple things like backup, right, being able to protect data. Paul mentioned, Dropbox and Box. Yeah, there's different ways that people want to access data besides a drive letter. They want to be able to access on mobile. They want to sync those applications. You can actually put something like that on the front end to our solution. If you're thinking about, again, security or body cams or surveillance, more and more, again, unstructured data when it comes to video and images, for example. Great solution for that. If you're thinking about archiving scientific data, research data, again, these are all things that can be, the solution can address, and you can actually address multiple use cases in the same platform. That's part of why you need such scalability. And then lastly, there's lots of different ways to identify it, but when you're thinking about analytics data, and again, a place to collect the data, archive it, keep it for further analysis, great platform for that. So some examples. This is a European university, tens of thousands of students, actually almost 100,000. A very classic scenario where you have folks that are in graduate school doing research, you have undergraduates, you have a very broad population. And their decision was basically, they had a hodgepodge of solutions based on department, based on people basically finding their own answers. And they were able to create a more centralized environment. And again, this is, I think Paul detailed it well. You can't necessarily force standardization, but you can create essentially a competitive solution to what folks would have to choose from. And that's exactly what this university did. They put something in place that was competitive. There's many different ways to access the system, whether it's through standard file services or through a sync and share type of environment. Thus, they were able to address a ton of the different research groups for a place to put their research data as well as to put some of their collaboration data. So, and they were able to really change the economics, change the environment away from many, many different silos of products into a single, very scalable, very reliable storage cloud. Another good example, we didn't talk specifically about law enforcement or entities like that, but we've had a number of customers in this space as well where, if you think about surveillance, if you think about body cams, huge amounts of data have to be put somewhere. So this particular customer is doing license plate storage, again, for law enforcement. They were able to do this very, very competitively. So, this is a classic choice that some entities have to make between putting something on premises or in the cloud. They're able to do something with HPE and Scality for lower TCO than the public cloud. One of the key things to think about when you're thinking about public cloud is how much are you going to access that data, right? So the storage cost is only a small part of the actual total cost. They're able to do this. They're able to, as I said, be able to handle the data and protect the data without being locked to hardware and grow over time. Last customer example, many more that we could go over, but we're time constrained. This is the Defense Ministry of France. Again, very classic scenario. One of the differences here, though, is we're also now talking about multiple sites. So they have offices throughout France, and now they're able to, again, consolidate, put into one single storage environment across multiple sites with many, many different applications addressing that storage. And one of the key benefits there is now you have disaster protection in a single system. So if they lose a site, the entire system is still available. All those applications are available, and it's native to the solution, right? So again, moving from a world where everybody was in the same building, in the same physical building, and there was no notion of protecting data outside other than to back up to tape and move it somewhere else. This solution is natively multi-site. So just to recap a little bit about the technology, again, you have two different pieces. You have the Scality Ring software running on top of HPE hardware. So Scality Ring, only three things you have to remember. very, very high performance across file and object types of applications in a single platform. So that enables you to address all kinds of apps, whether you're talking about things that want to talk, for example, NFS, or things that would rather talk to an API, same solution. 100% reliable. So a lot of that is the special sauce where we can protect data across single or multiple sites in a single system. And then finally, the decoupling of the software from the hardware, working with a great partner in HPE, which has, we believe, the best hardware on the market, but able to take advantage of the best stuff today and tomorrow. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bob Shar, who's going to talk about the HPE pieces of the solution and wrap up the overall presentation.
Great. Thank you, Leo. And as it relates to the SLED-ready file, software-defined file and content storage, it's the power of both HPE and Scality coming together. And we're solving some big problems, as Leo mentioned. You know, he's giving an example of some video surveillance archive use case. And then, of course, you've heard from other guest speakers here today around the need for research data at universities. But, you know, as we do more and more research type of things, especially around university healthcare systems and cancer research, the need for comparative analysis is critical. And the only way you can do that is by building out a low-cost, highly available file and content platform to house these data sets. It just doesn't make sense that you'd use high-cost or JBOD type of storage to do that, especially when this data is critical and it ties into patient care and it's collaboration with doctors and physicians and even pharmaceutical industries. Over time, you'll see advanced collaboration efforts, and it ties also back into file sync and share and mobility. These are really critical things that take place. But to use the best-of-breed building blocks like the HP Apollo server technology that's highly available storage-dense server-dense platform powered by Intel is the perfect building block for a software-defined storage platform like this one. And it really allows a unique advantage as a platform. It allows you to scale performance and I/O by adding more compute and memory along with capacity so that over time you're also equally scaling performance with capacity. That is a uniqueness. And as Leo mentioned, as these Apollo platforms evolve to become even more storage dense and more powerful, you're not tied into this particular platform or this release of Apollo. It will take advantage of the next generation technology from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. The other key thing that we'd like to highlight today is the fact that we have some nice services that really complement the offering. It's not just about throwing technology out at our customers. It's tying it all together. It's working with a trusted partner like HPE that can come in on site to help tie these applications in, because maybe the way you're doing business today might have taken advantage of a legacy platform. And maybe that legacy platform is either end of life or it's too costly because it relies on expensive backplanes that have an interdependency on things like InfiniBand. Well, that's really not the case here. We're going to use the best of breed technologies that use the best Ethernet capabilities available today from Hewlett-Packard, and we can advise, we can consult, and we can help transform your environment today and ensure that the data is accessible on this new platform. The other thing that we can do that's unique to Hewlett-Packard Enterprise that no one else is going to do for you is the fact that through that production rollout, we're going to be there in lockstep with you. We have that capability even 15 days after a production go-live date. We're going to be there with your folks on the floor to make sure everything is smoothly accessible over time, just as it was when you began testing the solution. So just keep that in mind. So the call to action, this technology, you could kick the tires, feel out the software layer, start playing with it for free. You don't have to pay for that. You can download a trial release copy or access it actually here on this URL from Scality. And we have several resources available here that are available to assist and carry this discussion further. We'd encourage you to reach out to both HPE and Scality resources here today. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks very much, Leo and Bob. And so we've got just about a few more minutes to ask some questions. We have some for our audience. Again, those of you that are following along, submit your questions using your chat function, your Q&A box. I have a couple questions, some relating to the technologies that were just discussed. We have a question here regarding the Scality ring. And the question is this a new storage from HP as opposed to available, I guess, with some other vendors? And I'll throw that one back to you, Leo.
Sure. Thanks, Wyatt. So this is a solution from Scality and HPE. Again, Scality provides the software. HPE provides the hardware. It is available through HPE. So if you're an HPE customer, you could purchase the entire solution through HPE. It will provide the solution and the support through one vendor.
Super. I got another question here, and someone wants to know, I have a vision for the analytics and big data helping me do more, but I'm held back by budgets and the costs and constraints of my current infrastructure for getting all the data under control. So I guess the question here is, are there some best practices you could recommend to address my foundation first? Again, so I'll throw that out to any of you gentlemen, but again, Leo, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. So I think, customers have, there's some choices now to make, certainly, when it comes to data storage and where you're going to actually put the information. And part of that strategy has to be, what is my vision here? What is my long-term play when it comes to this data? And I think some of the other presenters talked about that value. Some of it's clear, some of it's not clear. So our perspective is you need a great infrastructure to let you store a lot of stuff as you're determining the value, right? So having that infrastructure, having something that's efficient, cost competitive, you're going to be able to do that with the solution today that we talked about, really at a level of economics that is very new, right? Very competitive with public cloud, significantly cheaper actually, and it's going to give you a long-term strategy for your data.
Super. Here's another question. Oh, sorry, another answer there. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to add, I don't know if leasing is an option for our customers in this space, but if creatively so, HP does have a financial services arm to help with the customer concern around costs so that they can pay as you grow. In other words, you can get more technology on premise that you can scale into, but you're only going to pay for what you consume. So that's a new shift, but that is also available from HPE to make this come to life.
That sounds helpful. Here's another question. Does this solution integrate with Amazon's S3 API and their cloud system?
Absolutely.
Yeah, what we're finding in the market is there is still no standard what's called object API. Amazon's S3 has become essentially a de facto standard. It's a decent way to handle data. Yes, the solution supports it, but you have choices. So you can, if this is a new application you're thinking about, there's other ways to work with the system. Other APIs such as the OpenStack Swift API, or a very, very efficient API that we offer that's specific to the solution. And if you're actually not going to be developing using an object API, you can just use standard file protocols. That's very unique to the solution in that you don't have to rewrite your applications if you don't need to.
Great. Another question is, what type of data protection does this solution use?
So we use erasure coding in the ring, and that is a dynamic policy that will allow you to protect the data across multiple sites for up to 100% of uptime.
Great. I have another question. This is really more for perhaps Mark and also Paul, although I'm interested in all your perspectives. But the question is, do you believe states and higher education customers are finally looking to rapidly adopt big data and agile innovation, or are they still behind the curve a little compared to other vertical industries like the Fortune 500? Who'd like to take that?
It's Mark. I'll take it first. Well, so first of all, the thing people need to remember, and they often forget, is almost all the states, if they're from a revenue standpoint, were placed up against private companies, they would all be global Fortune 500. Like Arkansas, revenue-wise, is the same size as McDonald's and Coca-Cola. So that's a long way of saying, or a short way of saying, yes, Arkansas as a state and other states have to manage big data. They have to get on the path. Would I say we're behind? Perhaps, but it's mostly because of, I alluded to in my presentation, it's a capability problem because of how states hire and promote and pay. But we're trying to solve that in Arkansas.
From the higher education perspective, I see increasing number of research labs dealing with the big data analytics. So I'm imagining that there'll be much more funding coming in that direction. At the same time, from the private sector, there are companies that are emerging out there that specifically providing services around big data analytics. One company that I know of is Civitas Learning. They help universities plan and design solutions to not only organize your data, but also come up with various types of reporting features that would help university administrators to better design their programs and help students design their course path and learning experiences as well. So I think it's certainly a rapidly growing area, and then there'll be certainly a lot more funding will be available in these areas.
Leo or Bob, you obviously have kind of a perspective both on the commercial and the public sector. Any additional thoughts?
No, I'm also seeing the trend at many universities, medical centers. So the next big thing around big data and data analytics is around healthcare and research data. So, the genome sequencing has been in existence for quite a long time at many universities. Done business everywhere here from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast. And now it's evolving to the point where the medical centers want to leverage different results taking place or different high-performance compute clusters capabilities. But they need now, they're generating even more amounts of data. When they run these jobs, these results are pretty large. But, to do any kind of comparative analysis, you need the ability to keep the results online so you can see what happens to a patient prior to a drug treatment and what happens post-treatment, or if the treatment is even working so you can try something else. This is really a new cutting-edge evolution of big data in the medical space that's taken place at many universities today.
Well, gentlemen, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it there. I really want to thank you all for sharing your different insights. Mark Meyer from Arkansas, Paul Kim from Stanford, Leo Leung from Scality, and Bob Shar from HPE. And clearly one of the takeaway messages is that as we continue to really find the need to scale and analyze data, it becomes even more important than ever to have the right foundation and strategy and architecture in place to do that. And I think we got a good sense that actually a lot's being done, and there's really better tools than ever to do that. So thank you all for sharing that. I want to thank our audience today once again for tuning in. I'd like to again acknowledge HPE and Intel to make today's program possible. Just a reminder, our program today will be available on demand for the next 90 days. So please consider sending a link to your colleagues and others who might be interested in it. There's a lot of valuable information. Don't forget you can download the slides in their entirety and the white paper as an added resource, and that will also be available for the next 90 days. So we're going to wrap it up there. Look for more of our coverage on data management and analysis in all of our publications, FedScoop, StateScoop, and EdScoop. And we'll continue to be covering this category of topic, and hope you'll continue to follow us there. So on behalf of all of us here, this is Wyatt Cash saying thanks very much for being with you, and we'll see you next time.